Hey class. So today we're going to be veering away from the paneling and the divide surface and the adaptive components that we've been focusing on for the last couple weeks and start to get into how to take complex geometry that you may have built in Rhino or other lesser softwares and import that within the Revit environment and actually start to manipulate its materiality, manipulate its form potentially, depending on the geometry, and also start to go over Enscape, the live rendering softwares. It's Enscape and Lumion, and how to set up your files for a really nice rendering. So I've opened my your typical template that we've been using. Also, I would open up Rhino, get that initiated so that it's ready by the time we get to it. And for taking files, inserting files into Revit, it's up at the top under the ribbon is an insert. We've used it for inserting imagery and PDFs for reference, but it also has all of this for both 3D geometry and different files, and you can also place other Revit files in here. So the two main ways of taking a file and putting it into Revit is both importing and linking. So importing is taking a singular instance of a file, importing it and placing it into the Revit file, and then that's just the way it is. That's how it's going to be. It's not going to change. Linking provides you an avenue in which you can place, like say I'm doing an office and it has a parking deck next to it. To maintain some simplicity and keep the file size down, I would model the office model in one Revit file, and I would model the parking deck file or project in another file. And then what I would do is take the parking deck project and link it into the office file, so that you still have all of the contextual information in the one file, but you're keeping all of the major components separate, so you can easily work on it. It doesn't start lagging your computer, because it can. And what linking does is it keeps a reference of that file that you've linked in, so that if you go in and change anything within the linked file, you can what is termed reloading or relinking that file and the other. So you're updating it. And you can do that with CAD files as well. So I'll show you both ways. Today, we'll be focusing first on importing CAD. Now, obviously, we need to model a geometry. So what we'll do is do a really simple box. And I'll turn on, just so we have some reference. So just do a simple extrusion. You can do it any way you want. I'm gonna explode this guy for right now. I'm going to take one surface, I'm gonna rebuild it. Hit OK. And then I'm gonna do points on and take these 4 central points. I know I moved through that fast, but hopefully you guys are proficient in Rhino from comp methods. And I'm just going to create a weird bump, essentially, in this file. And then I'll select everything, join it again, so it's a solid. One thing to be aware of is solids are much easier to manipulate than singular surfaces. You can definitely bring in singular surfaces into Revit, but in terms of manipulating materiality or actually creating like conceptual mass elements from an imported CAD file, solids are typically the best. For some reason, Revit can just read that best, because really in Revit, there doesn't exist singular surfaces. Of course, there's singular faces of objects, But just like in real life, everything has a thickness. And so singular planes, singular surfaces don't really compute well within Revit. So from here, what you're going to do is File, Export Selected, and then it'll probably default to Rhino model. What you want to do is go down and select AutoCAD file, and then you can save it, whatever name you want. And then it's going to pop up with this window here. Now it's going to default to default. But I have found, and this is totally up to you, it's totally dependent on what you are exporting and what type of file. But I have always found that 2007 Solids exports the best. It exports the information in a way that Revit just reads best. So 2007 Solids, hit OK, and then we'll go back to Revit, and we'll import this CAD. So import, find your guy. So it's going to pop up with this window. A couple of things at the bottom that you want to be aware of. First is the file type. So we set up ours as a DWG or an AutoCAD file, but it does accept several other files, including Rhino files. If, for whatever reason, the DWG file does not work for you and you want to try other files, that's completely okay. Especially when importing complex geometry, sometimes it's really just testing out what works best for what you are importing. So if it doesn't work for the first type, just try different things. And sometimes it does depend on how well you've modeled it in Rhino, how clean the geometry is. But you do have access to all of these different file types that you can import. But DWG was the first, and personally I found it's the best. And then underneath that, colors, so you can preserve the colors, you can do black and white. This is more prevalent when you're importing a two-dimensional CAD file. Like we import a lot of surveys, site diagrams, or details that are just 2D CAD files. And sometimes it's best to leave the colors preserved just so that you can distinguish different elements from one another. Layers and levels, definitely want to bring all, but you can specify if you've exported multiple layers. You can specify which ones you want. Auto detect, so if your thing is coming in really wacky, my Rhino file is set up in feet, so you can go in and specify exactly what the import units are. And then positioning. So positioning is very important. Especially when you bring in really large CAD files. Like I was saying, the site files, sometimes the origin is like 20 miles away. So I typically do manual from the center. So it's going to take the center of the geometry and place it wherever your mouse is, wherever you click. And then it asks for where you want to place. Now, you can place it on different levels. Right now it's only allowing me to do level 1, and that's because I'm in a 3D view. If I went to level 2, it would typically allow me to do level 2 or roof or whatever kind of level you want. And then obviously I need to select that, and then sometimes as well, so this is in a 3D view, so this isn't populating, but let's say I was in level 1 and I was bringing in a CAD plan and I only wanted it to show up in the level 1 floor plan. If you click that, it will only show up in level 1 and it will not populate in any other drawing, which is really helpful if you're just using it as a reference. So once we have all of this set, hit open, and then since we did center, we can just place. And then the bump, since it doesn't technically have an edge, doesn't have an outline, but if you do shaded, you can start to see it a little bit better. Now, you can change the material of this, but we'll get into that a little bit later when we're setting up Enscape. So the first thing I want to do is show you the options that pop up up at the top when you select it, you can delete layers. Of course, we only have 2 layers. These layers do come from Rhino, and it comes from what layers are actually in the geometry. So obviously we have 5 different layers here, but it's only, the geometry is only set to 1 layer, so it only brings in 1 layer, and that's the default. You can also explode or query. If you explode, unless it's a 2D CAD file or you're in a conceptual mass environment, which we're going to get into in a second, it's typically not going to explode. So what you want to be very careful of this. The other thing is query. So query is really good if you have a really large CAD plan or CAD file and you want to see what the different line is. So you can hit query and then select an element, and it's going to bring up what type of geometry. So it's a face geometry. It's not associated with any blocks, and then what layer it is. And then you can actually hide that in the view if you so choose. This is really good if you bring in a CAD plan and there's like a million different lines and you only need a certain amount. You can hide or delete certain layers within the CAD plan. I'll show you the difference between importing and linking. So with this right now, it's an imported model. All you have are these different parameter inputs. So you can do 5 feet and it'll raise it up on 5 feet. You can change the reference level if you want to put it on level 2, etc. But once you import it, it's done. Like, you can't make any changes to it. It's set. So what I like to do is, especially when I'm just placing something that I'm not using to manipulate, is I link it. So what I'm going to do is up at the top under insert, I'm going to link CAD. And then it's the same process as before. Same parameters, same inputs, and same geometry that pops up. But the nice thing about this is if I go in and let's do the same thing that we did to one side to another. So let's rebuild this guy. Let's do another bump. And then once again, join everything. And then export this again to bump. So when linking, make sure that you're saving over the file that you imported. Otherwise, it's not going to reload. Now, that's not necessarily true. You can reload from a different file. So first, let's just do your typical saving over. So save. Yes, you want to replace it. Solids. Okay. And then go in and it's really hard to see let's see if we can do consistent colors now. Realistic. That's a little bit better. I just want to be able to actually see the changes that we do. So since this is a linked file, what we can do is up at the top in the middle under manage links. This also can be found under the manage tab on the right, manage links. If we select that, it's going to bring up all the different files that we have linked within our project. Of course, we don't have any Revit projects linked right now, but we do have this CAD file. So, since we've changed, and actually let me pan to the side in which it's going to change so you can see. If we go to CAD and then reload, hit OK. Now it's updated to the changes that we made to the geometry. Again, so if you saved it to a different file name for some reason, you can do reload from and specify a new file to import it from, and import it. It'll override the file and place it in the same place in which the original was. All right, so that's how we link files. Let's go into so let's see, what do I want to do first? So first, let's show you how to manipulate this in the conceptual massing environment. So massing in site, if we go to in-place mass, and doesn't matter the name. So in this, we can link CAD, but I want to import CAD because what I'm going to do is import this geometry and then kind of explode the geometry, create it as its own conceptual mass piece, and then it'll be manipulatable. Yes, that's a word. And then we can do different things to it. So import CAD, bump, place it. So it looks like the same kind of geometry that we imported before. But now that we're inside the conceptual massing environment, when we go to explode, it actually creates a solid conceptual mass geometry that you can then manipulate. So just like a regular conceptual mass, you can go in, divide the surface. You can go in and place the different patterns. We could go in, create, we could insert any of the families that we've created in the past couple classes, and do that. Remember to tab to grab those faces. So we can do a lot of stuff. And just like here, actually, I'm gonna delete this divide surface. And just like with a typical conceptual mass, you can also do mass floors with this. So now we have a floor. We can go in, we can place a floor on the face. Right, and now it's the same, it matches the same exact curvature as before. We can go in and do basic walls. I don't know if this, oh, look at that. So it even does the really complex curvature with a basic wall. Of course, remember, it will not do curtain walls. It will do curtain systems or the divide surface. So you can do that. Now, depending on, like, this geometry, while it does have complex curvature in it, it's not all that complex for Revit to read. So it's not always as easy as what we just did. I just want you guys to be aware of that. So if you're doing a really complex model, be aware it's not always going to work. Don't 100% rely on it. If you're developing the geometry in Rhino, I would do tests, right? So as you're developing it, export the geometry and import it in here. Make sure that you can still turn it into a conceptual mass, actually be able to manipulate it, and as you develop it, continue to test, so that you're making sure that what you're doing within Rhino is working, and you can catch any major change that you make that actually errors out. But for right now, so what we've created is does work, has that geometry. One other thing to be aware of, so that's how to manipulate the Rhino geometry in the conceptual mass environment. Back to kind of more of the standalone linked CAD file. So if we go into level 2, there's a couple things that you need to be aware of. One is that it doesn't appear like this is being cut through. And one thing with imported files, and I don't know if it's necessarily because, it was originally designed to only import two-dimensional files, but when you're linking or importing CAD geometry directly directly into a project, I want to make sure, let's just make sure the view range is turned on. Yeah, so even still, it doesn't cut through the geometry like it does here, right? Like if we were on level 2 and we're cutting through this geometry, it should have the curvature highlighted. So the way to work around that, if you do need to cut through this geometry, let's say you have like a big, crazy, complex curved wall that you want to place in your lobby of a building, and you need it to actually cut through where the regular floor plane is cutting through. What you're going to have to do is, instead of importing it directly into the Revit environment, you need to actually import it into a family. So let's do File, New, Family. This can just be a really simple generic model. Just do regular. And we can do the same exact thing as before. There's Insert tab up here. Of course, here you can't link CAD. You can import the CAD. So be aware of that. But we can take that, import it. We can save this family. Just call it bump again. And then we can load this into our project. And then you can kind of see, maybe because let's try changing. Oh, this is why. Freaking A. It's cutting 4 feet above there we go. So this is a little bit better. So make sure that your view range, I don't know why it defaults to 20 feet above the floor. Make sure it's cutting around 4 feet. But as you can see, so this is the linked file that we linked directly into our project, and this is the family that we imported the geometry into. And it's actually cutting through the geometry instead of just kind of showing the top of it. So those are kind of the 3 different ways of importing geometry from Rhino or another modeling software into Revit. And ooh, look at that. I think this is, yeah. Level 2, still same exact thing. So now what I'm going to do is show you guys how to manipulate the material of imported geometry. So if we go back to shaded, we're on realistic, but I'm going to turn back to shaded. This is really weird, funky red, which I do not like. And what we can do is under Manage, right next to the materials is Object Styles. And if you open that, it's going to give you, the basic. This is pretty much all the default materials and colors for all the different model components within Revit. But on the far right is an Imported Objects tab. And this shows the layers. So it shows the geometry that's imported directly into Revit. So that's why bump shows up. It also shows the different layers that are imported within families. So even if you imported your geometry inside a separate family and then loaded that into the project, you still can manipulate the material and the line color and all the graphics of that geometry inside your main project. So I'm going to change a couple things. So default is what the geometry is set to from layers, Remember, that's coming directly from Rhino. If we change this layer to, I don't know, bump material or whatnot, if we renamed it and relinked it, this name here would change to bump material. So just be aware of that, especially when you're, if you're doing a model that has a lot of different materials that you want to apply. Like I was just doing a desk piece of furniture in a lobby, and it had several different materials to it. I had to break out all those layers, just like you would when you're creating a typical Rhino file. And then you can manipulate those separate materials here. So line color, we can keep that black. Line pattern, all that good stuff. So material. So if we go in and change this material, it'll open up the material tab. So this is just the default render material. We can change it to whatever we want. So let's change this one to chrome plated for whatever reason. And so that we can distinguish between the two, let's change this one to cyan. Hit OK. And then let's change the imported geometry to, change it to glass. And of course I should have changed that to another color, but let's change it to orange. Press OK. All right, so now we have the two different materials. You can obviously go in, change if you want line materials, line colors, all that good stuff changed. You can change that here as well. So now we've changed both of those to the different materials. And you can go in and change those there. If you go in and try and paint, you can't paint. I don't know if we've done painting. So let me back up. Paint. So when applying materials, since we're going to get into rendering and setting up your file for a decent rendering, one thing to be aware of is the paint tool. So the paint tool is up here under the modify tab. It's this kind of, I guess it's the material, and then it applies to a geometry symbol. But it's up here. If you select it, it brings up all the different materials in your file. And what you can do is select the material that you want to paint onto an object, and you can go in and paint an object with that material. So right now, the top of this conceptual mass, the top face is still just the conceptual mass material. So what I can do is actually go in and paint the top of this conceptual mass with the aluminum material, and it will actually turn that into a aluminum material. I can do the same thing. If you really want to get detailed with certain elements, like the edge of this wall, if you tab in and make sure that that boundary is highlighted blue, you can actually turn the boundary of this wall into copper. That sort of stuff. The problem when using these imported geometries is you can't paint anything. So you have to make sure that the layers in which they are assigned in Rhino are correct. Because if you want to change different faces of this this bump geometry, you're going to have to change it within Rhino. All right. So that, I believe, and let me check my notes. I believe that is the majority of what I had for importing. So we will get into Enscape a little bit. It sounds like someone's... Oh, my house is on fire. Okay, so Enscape, you should have it loaded. It's up at the top ribbon. It has its own drop-down tab. So I'll go through the whole the tab to begin with, and then we'll start. So far left is your start command. This is how you launch Enscape. And when you launch Enscape, it's going to launch in a pre-selected 3D, only 3D view. So if you have a bunch of different 3D views set up, you can specify which one, and whatever is in that view, if certain objects are hidden, if certain objects in the visibility graphics are turned off, those will not show up in Enscape. So just be aware of that. Make sure that everything that you want to show up is turned on. So we can just make sure we are currently in the 3D, so that's okay. If you have a VR headset, you can actually turn on that and it will split the screen and do the manipulate itself to accompany a VR headset. And then under tools is actually where you do the rendering. So take screenshot is actually create a rendering. Exporting is taking this, like whatever Enscape file you have open, and exporting a standalone Enscape file that you can open up completely separate of Revit and walk around and do certain things. It loses its live connection to Revit, and it only has what elements you exported in it. But it's good if you want to open a bunch of different views at the same time to cycle through with clients or whatnot. Create 3D view. So this is if you are in a certain perspective that you really, really like and want to save it, so you can open it back up and take a series of renderings from the same exact spot. You can create a 3D view, and what it does is actually it'll prompt you, and we'll do this in a second, prompt you with a name, and it'll create a 3D view underneath your 3D views under the project browser. Asset library, very important. This has all of your different people, cars, trees, a bunch of different stuff that has realistic rendering properties to them, realistic textures, and really help entourage renderings. And then here is a video, so I'll show you how to do that. Panorama, if you want to do, this is really cool because you can actually export a file that you can open up on an internet browser and send to a client or send to somebody, and they can actually just pan around from whatever point you've exported the panorama from and view around the file and kind of get a sense of the space or the scale of the building, all that good stuff. This is tied to the panoramas, so if you upload a panorama to the internet to view, this is where you can go in and view all those. Sounds we won't get into. Those are they're starting to develop animations within Enscape, so when you do a fly through, things are animated, and sounds are one of those. And then here are your different settings for the renderings, which we'll get into in a second. So let's start. Dun, dun, dun. And it takes a little bit to start, and depending on how large your file is, it'll take a little bit longer. And one thing while we're waiting, here, let me pause. Oh, of course. One thing while we're waiting, oh, here we go. Popped up. So we are in Enscape. So Enscape, to be able to maneuver within Enscape, is kind of like a video game. So you have this help window down at the bottom, and this shows you all the different commands in which you need to maneuver in Enscape. So on the far left is your most important. This is how you move throughout Enscape. So ASWD is moving forward, back, side to side, and then EQ is up and down. So we're really far into this geometry. So where is my other geometry, my friend? Very interesting. Oh, hold on. So this might be because this one is glass. And I don't know why. Let me see. I just want to see what is actually... Very interesting. Is it because my mask is not turned on? I wonder if that's the reason. Make sure you go and turn on your mask. It shouldn't matter though. Very interesting. Well, alright, so we have our 3D, has all that different geometry. So first let's put in a floor. So we have a ground plane in which we can set things on. So let's just draw a floor at level 1, kind of ridiculously large. Alright, this doesn't seem to be updating, of course. So let's do a couple things real quick. Let's turn this, oops. Let's turn this to floor. Let's turn this to just a really simple white material. All right, and then let's go into level 1. Let me show you the difference in opening different 3D views. So let's go to 3D view. Let's do a camera. Let's shoot a perspective. So now we have this perspective of these different geometries. We can see them all. We have the ground plane. So under Enscape, we can go in and select the 3D view that we created, 3D view 1, and then hit start. And it should open in the general perspective in which the perspective is taken. There we go. Huh. That's weird. I wonder why the 3D view was not working. But as you can see, it opens in the general perspective in which the camera view was taken. And now we can walk around with our ASWD EQ. Now if you're going too slow, down at the bottom is both fast and faster. So if you hold shift, you move a little bit faster, and if you hold shift and control, you move really fast. And that is if you have a really big file and you need to pan around a huge site or fly up a couple stories. All right, so if you pan back around, and if you do, so here, let me fly out. If you do get so far out, it's a pain in the ass to get back. What you can do is just go to the drop down and hit 3D view again, and it will manipulate and move itself back to its original position, which is really nice. All right, I'm glad I got these showing back up. So you can see that the materials that we changed the families to are actually rendering pretty nicely within Enscape. So we had a chrome finish on the middle, we had glass on the outside, and then this is just what we were manipulating here. But if you can go to the side, you can see that it does indeed have that copper edge that we painted on there. And then if we fly up, one thing to also, so let me turn this guy back on. So one thing to also be aware of is flying versus walking. So it's pretty self-explanatory. If you hit spacebar, it will toggle between flying and walking. Walking will basically set you down on the closest surface underneath you at a predetermined height, which is set at the average eye level of a human being. And then you can, when you move around, you can walk around at the general eye level of a person. When you are walking, you cannot use the up and down, the EQ, because you can't, person can't physically move up and down. To get that up and down toggle to work, if you hit spacebar again to the fly mode, which you can also see up at the top and toggle up at the top, you can then start to move up and down, fly around, all that good stuff. All right. So what does this mean? Oh, so I wanted to toggle up, show you. So we set an aluminum material up at the top. That's set as well. So I just hit spacebar, fly back down. I'm gonna go in and delete this floor because I don't like seeing it. Go back into Enscape. All right, cool. I'm gonna delete that mask floor too because I don't like it peering out at me. Enscape. Let me see. I want to kind of split the screen, which is not going to look fantastic, but we'll do for now. All right, so we have the 3D view. All right, so settings within Enscape. So if you go to the settings and hit visual settings, general settings is pretty boring, but it does have some important stuff. So input, this is if you want to change mouse speed or movement speeds. If you're moving around too quick or too slow, you can increase that here. And you can also, the height, so that eye level you can change here. Width, I guess, if you want to imagine someone being really, really large or skinny, you can do that. Devices, not a big deal. The biggest thing that you want here is preferences, I thought. Licensing, all that good stuff. Okay, must have moved. All right, so input is probably the biggest thing that you'll need to change from general settings, unless you do need to update your license. The biggest settings are in the visual settings, and this is where you can change all of the different elements within the Revit environment. So starting with rendering, so outlines. Outlines are if you want to see line work within your rendering. So if we increase this guy, you can see that it has all the different outlines of all the different elements, except for glass because it's transparent. And you can change that. You can increase or decrease it. Sometimes I like to have it on there, especially if you have like reveals or something very faint in which you want to make apparent. You can turn that on. Mode's pretty important. If you don't have a lot of your materials set up, you just want to see a general sense of what the scale and the shape of the materials are. If you turn it to white, it turns all the different materials to white. And I'm going to close out this real quick. Close out, there you go. And I'm going to delete this mask floor. Cool. I don't like that line. Anyway, so that's white. Go back to visual settings. There's a couple other ones. Polystyrol, which just is basically a different form of white. And then light view. So light view is really important if you want to see how different, if you're in an interior of a space and want to see how far the light is penetrating through, you can do that with light view. The actual units themselves, it's not a really great analytical tool if you want to measure light levels, but if you do want to see, just measure how far the light is penetrating within the space, if what you were envisioning is somewhat working, you can use this to justify some of those moves. I guess this is a good time to bring up time of day. So time of day at the bottom of your help screen is time of day. So if you hold shift and then right click and then pan left or right, it will change the time of day. And if you turn this back to your regular materials, then if you change the time of day, it also changes the cloud, which is kind of cool. And this is based on whatever settings you have within Revit. So if you have your location set up correctly, your orientation set up correctly, then you can actually choose like different times of the month, different times of the day, and it will be pretty accurate in terms of where the sun is set and the actual time of day. If you turn off the hide, if you turn off the help window by hitting H or hide, then you can see at the bottom left is an actual time. So this is 8:30, 8 o'clock in the morning, and then if we pan all the way across, you can get into, and it's military time, so 24 hours. So this is about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and then at sunset, and then it does do, nighttime, sunrises, sunsets. All right. So that is the different modes, time of day. So I always have auto exposure on, but you can change it if you so choose for whatever reason. I just have auto on. And I think I had it to 50%. Projection's pretty important. So if we hit H again, it's up at the top. 2 point, you can change it to a perspective, which changes it. So if you get up really close, you can actually look up. If you change this back to 2 point perspective, it warps it. So 2 point perspective is really good if you're looking straight at an object, kind of straight at the horizon line, and you're far enough away from the object. But if you go too far above or below, it's going to really warp your images. So if you're really far above looking down or really far below looking up, you want to change that to perspective. You can also change it in the settings here to perspective. Perspective is more of more of what like your typical camera will take, but 2 point perspective is kind of more what humans see the world as. Of course, when you look up, that doesn't always change, but typically professional renderings are always done in 2 point perspective. And then you can also do orthographic, which is more of a true axonometric, but so this is a new part of Revit, Enscape. It's a little janky, a little hard to control, but if you do want to do a true axonometric rendering, you can do that. What I would suggest is you set up the axonometric in Revit the way you want it, and then open Enscape up with the orthographic projection turned on, and then take it from there, because it's really difficult to it's not super difficult, but it was originally set up as a for 2 point perspective and regular perspective. What I just did there, which of course I haven't pointed out. So the other thing, if you want to come back to a place from far away, is you can double click on a surface and it will bring you to that surface, which is kind of nice. Depth of field. So if you want to turn on like portrait mode in iPhone, have some depth, some like kind of blur in the background and focus on the object in the foreground, you can do that. And then focus, auto focusing, just like a camera. And then field of view. So human are typically at 90 degrees, but you can change that if you want to need to capture more or less. So this is kind of like a fisheye lens, and then telezoom. So put that back to 90. Rendering quality. So this is dependent on how good your computer is and how well how big your file is. So if you turn this down to draft, then ooh, give it a sec. So it's going to really dumb down all of the rendering quality. But when you go to actually render, it'll be really nice and clean. So also image. So if you go to the image tab, here I'm going to turn my rendering back up to high because my computer's pretty dang good. If we go to image, so auto contrast, definitely want that on, but you can control the different highlights and shadows if you so choose. Saturation, all the good stuff here, temperature, ambient brightness, all that good stuff. And then you can also add different effects for vignette or bloom or all that fun stuff if you want to get real stylized. Atmosphere is the other big one. So atmosphere, right now we just have a sky with a gray horizon. If you want like more of a conceptual background, you can do white background. I do that a lot when I'm not doing realistic renderings, especially when we have objects like this. The one kind of issue with not having a rendering, having a white rendering, is our transparent materials tend to disappear because they have nothing to refract light through, so you can't really see it. So turn this back on. If you want to turn fog on, I guess you can do that. Sun brightness, moon brightness, all this good stuff you can play around with. The horizon, so this is another thing. So if we did white background, it doesn't have any horizon line. So do white background. Skybox. So I don't know how many of you are familiar with skyboxes. You can do it in Rhino, but skyboxes you can load in from different websites, and they're essentially different skies. So you can load in whatever you want, and it will render just like this. These are basically all different types of skyboxes that are preloaded. So if we select mountains, then there's mountains in the background. If we do, a town, it's a nice little town. Seems like we're really high above. White cubes if you want to like do a pretend city, I guess. White ground. So that's kind of what we were at before. So let's just do, screw it, let's do white cubes. All right. And then wind, again, this is more of like for the animation if we're doing fly-throughs, cloud density, all that good stuff. And then capture is the big one. So capture is where you set all of your exports. So this is where you can set resolution. So it will typically match whatever resolution your screen is at, or at least the aspect ratio of it, and then you can determine the quality from here. Exporting object ID, material ID, and depth channels. So that is really important if you want to like Photoshop this afterwards. It will actually export, and when we do a rendering, we can export that, and I can show you exactly what that looks like. But you can use it to both identify the background as well as different materials. It's really, really nice for Photoshop. PNG, JPEG, if you want to change that, all that good stuff, blah, blah, blah. And then video, you can manipulate, the compression quality and the frames per second. Okay, so those are all the settings. Probably want to get into the rendering itself. So let's do that. Oh, actually, one more thing on materials, which I haven't shown you before. So what we're going to do, I haven't shown you this, pause live update. So this is going to live update any changes you make within the Revit file until you hit this button. Then you can make as many changes as you want within the Revit file, and then it'll wait until you hit that resume button again. If you have it up live updating, sometimes it takes forever to update, and you're constantly waiting for it to update. So make sure that you have that paused while you're making big changes. So this right now is Chrome, and so if we go to materials, so let's go to steel chrome plated. Yeah, steel chrome plated. Go to our appearance. So I don't know how many of you are familiar with bitmaps and texture mapping, but if we select cutouts, so this is for specifically metal, so we can do circles, straight circles. So this is essentially, if you take a bitmap, let's see, so let's see what comes up when we do custom. Yeah, so it's going to ask. So if we select custom, it'll show you kind of more exactly what a bitmap is. So a bitmap reads black and white texture, black and white pixels. So we're in cutouts right now. So everything it reads as black, it's going to remove from the material, essentially cutting it out. And then the white, it's going to leave in. You can change the scale of this here. You can change the color if you want. If we want like it partially cut out, like 50% cut out, we can put this at 50% gray. You can change the spacing of it by changing the scale down here. You can change the rotation of it by changing that here. And repetition, you can change here if you just want it like this is a good example. If you want a graphic, like a singular graphic, you wouldn't want that to tile. You want it in one place. So do that here. So bitmaps, black and white. So right now we have a checkered pattern. If you can see on the display here, it actually is cutting out little squares in a checkerboard pattern. So when we change this from custom to like staggered circles, that's essentially what it's reading is black dots, a black dot pattern that's staggered. And this is one of the nice things about the presets in Revit is that it comes in and you don't have to change that a lot. So we can change the diameter of the circles here. You can also change the spacing of the circles here. All right, so that's for steel chrome plated, which is our blue guy right here. The other thing that you can use that for is bump patterns. So let's do here. We'll create a new material. So down at the bottom left, create new material. White bumps. Let's do that. All right, so create a white material, change the color to white, and then in the default material settings, there are a lot of different options. You can change the reflectivity. You can change the transparency of it. You can add those cutouts just like we did before. And you can do the presets down here. You can also, if you Google, let's say black and white dots, right? Like you could import this file and it will cut out those black dots at this scale. And you can change the scale of that here. But if you want to do bumps, actually, that's what we'll do. Nah, we'll just do default. So, so we can turn that off. Obviously, if you want to turn any of these on, hit check mark, and then you can change the settings below that. I have found if you turn on too many of these, sometimes they will leave out certain. So if you turn on cutouts and bump, sometimes it'll only do the bump. I don't know why, but let's do bump. Cancel out. Let's just do a preset. Let's do the checkerboard, and this is fine, I guess. 1 foot. Let's rotate it 45 degrees just for fun. Hit done. And then the amount. So let's increase this a lot so it's very apparent. Hit OK. And then what we can do is let's change this wall to 1 inch thick and change it to our white bumps. White bumps. Hit OK. Hit all right. All right. All right. All right. So now that we have those textures in, we can go and resume live update. And since this is a pretty small file, it shouldn't take very long. And if we get up close, see if it worked here. All right, so sometimes we're doing these bump textures or whatnot. Sometimes need to close out and load back in. And it still looks like it's not coming in. So one thing that could be happening is, one thing to check, I guess. So if we turn it from shaded to realistic. Yeah, see, so all the bump textures are reading and the cutout textures are reading on in the file itself. What if we float up? Well, that's strange. Let me do a plain old wall. Yeah, let me just do a wall of what should be the bump texture. Oops. Okay, so I've tried a lot of different things, and I can't figure out why the texture maps are not showing up. I've tried deleting the complex geometry, just doing a really simple wall. That didn't work. I tried completely closing everything out and reopening it. That didn't work. It may be sometimes Enscape, they update pretty regularly. Sometimes there's bugs within the system. It might just be the geometry that we're importing. It has worked. I've done renderings with it, so be cognizant of that. And if you can incorporate some of those different elements, those texture maps within your project, do so. Because obviously, like with the cutouts, and with the bumps and those types of things, trying to model this kind of detail is impossible. It's not impossible. You could do a divide surface that is that dense, but it's going to make your file so large that it's going to be almost impossible to do. So, and same thing with cutouts, right? If you did try to model this and cut out all these individual holes, it would take forever. So utilize those texture maps as much as you can. and hopefully Enscape figures their shit out. But in the meantime, really quickly, to actual render, all you do is you can take a screenshot. So there's three different things. You can batch render, which allows you to render several different 3D views at once. You can render image, which essentially into document, which essentially renders the image and then creates a image file within the Revit project. So you can like place that image, that rendering onto a cover sheet or in a drawing or whatever. And then take screenshot is your typical one where you'll just save it. You can save it whatever name you want. And then if you actually toggle to Enscape, it'll come up with this rendering. And this is where if you if you had that image quality, the rendering quality at a low rate, it would bump it up to a really high rate. The last thing I want to show you, there's a lot more. So export, you can export a executable file, create 3D views. So if you click that, and here, if you go into Enscape, set up a view that you want, and then hit create 3D view and save it as a name. It's going to save this file as a 3D view. Now, the perspective that it creates is not always that great. So it doesn't necessarily match exactly in Revit what it shows in Enscape. But let's say you fly around, start manipulating or doing different things with your file, and then you want to open the same exact view that you were just at. All you got to do is go in, up, select bump, and it go back to the same exact perspective that you had before. And finally, this one is a long one. I might split it up into 2 videos just for you guys to have a break. So that's create 3D view asset library. So if you select that, it's going to open up a library that is based on the cloud, on the internet, and then it has all these different entourages that you can do, including vegetation and people, all scaled correctly, all at 100%. So you can click that, and then it will load that into the file automatically. It does take a little bit to do, and then you can just click and place. Sorry, I accidentally closed out. People. There we go. And you can have a guy riding a bike if you want, all that good stuff. But this is really good. So you can have that in here if we do that. All right, cool. So what that's doing right now is it's loading the different people into the project. As you can see, I mean, they're pretty realistic. They're not. You can kind of tell that they're still models, but from far away, I mean, they're pretty good for getting a sense of scale, and especially with trees and other inanimate objects, it's pretty helpful. And then camera path. So here, let's put that guy in here. There, and then let's do. So if we turn the video editor on and off, we'll do this really quickly. What it's going to do, it's going to change. Ooh, I must have turned it on and off. Select that one more time. So it provides this window down here for you guys. To set up a video, you're essentially going to set up different perspectives in which you want the video to manipulate itself to, and then you're going to use this button down here called Add Keyframe, and that essentially adds the different perspectives you want the camera to hit. So you don't plan out the entire thing, but you essentially set up different perspectives, and then it'll automatically manipulate itself to those frames. All right. So what that does when you start adding those keyframes is it gives you a camera path. So this is the path that the camera is going to follow as it moves around the image. If you want to edit certain keyframes, you can actually select the camera itself, or you can select the little key in here. Then it will go in to that image, and if you want to adjust it, you can do so by moving in and out or moving the frame around and then hitting apply. If you go back, then it will go back to your original view. You can add a camera frame by just clicking on the camera path, and it will add a frame, and then you can manipulate it. So you can really start to adjust the direction and the path in which the camera flies through to create the video. The other nice thing that you can do is you can change the speed by changing the duration. So you can actually set up, if you want this camera to, oh no, what happened? Phew, all right, I accidentally hit escape. But if you just go back, turn on camera, it'll pop back on. So if you go in here, you want this, the first camera to the second camera to be, 5 seconds. And then you want the second to third camera be 8 seconds. You can do that, and you can add that kind of speed to it, and then you can find the total duration of the entire path down here, which is about 12 seconds. The other cool thing about this, you can have the starting frame be at a certain time of day, so you can start it up right before sunrise, and then you can have it, the last one, be at sunset. And you can change any one of these times as well. And then when you're done setting it up, you can preview the file by hitting this preview down at the bottom. Let's see how it looks. Looks pretty good. So after that, if you minimize Enscape, you can hit render video and save it underneath the file in which you want to save. And then what it's going to do is it's going to go in, there you go, and it's going to render every single frame. So it takes a while, so be sure once you hit render, you have built in enough time to kind of leave the computer, go do whatever, go eat dinner or whatnot, and when it gets back, it'll create a full video that pretty much mimics the preview. Obviously, it's a much nicer, higher quality rendering. But so that is pretty much all of Enscape. Like I said, here, I'm going to cancel this video. So, those are all the settings that you can do. The rendering, I think I covered everything. Again, I don't know what is going on with the bump textures or the cutout textures. If you get it to work, please let me know. So for your submission, I'd like a 10-second video of these 3 blocks, or I want a 10-second video of these blocks. And then for your homework, it'll be essentially creating an Enscape rendering for the freehand project that you guys did, I think 2 classes ago. All right.